This is lesson 4.5, equations of parallel and perpendicular lines. This is the last lesson in this unit. We're still working with parallel and perpendicular lines, but we'll be looking specifically at their linear equations and the slopes and how that is kind of an important characteristic of parallel and perpendicular lines. So the main objective of this lesson is to write equations of parallel and perpendicular lines. I forgot my and there. And so that's what we'll be doing. We'll have to relearn some skills or kind of rediscuss some old skills that you've learned in algebra, and then we'll kind of extend that to make sure we understand what signifies this is a parallel line or this is a perpendicular line. So one of the things that we'll need to know is the slope formula. And again, if you don't have that memorized, obviously you probably did at some point in Algebra 1, but if not, that's okay. You've got it here right now. And so m represents the slope. That's the variable we use to represent slope. And so the slope formula, finding the the steepness of a line, or the slope between 2 points, we need to have at least 2 points, or just 2 points. So we have x sub 1 and y sub 1 and x sub 2, y sub 2. Those are 2 different coordinate points. And then we find the difference in the y's and the difference in the x's, and that gives us the slope. How much does it rise and how much does it run? Okay, how much does it go up and down? How much does it go left and right? Okay, that's the slope. Now, to remind you, this is what the type of problem looks like when you're finding the slope between 2 points. So if I have this coordinate point negative 3, 8 and this point 2, negative 11, how do I plug that into the formula to get my slope? So my y's go on top. So I'll take negative 11 minus 8. You're subtracting them. And then my x's go on bottom. 2 minus negative 3. And then I complete the calculation. Negative 11 minus 8 is negative 19. 2 minus negative 3 is positive 5. And so that's the slope, negative 19 fifths. Okay, that is the slope between these 2 points. And so you'll need to be able to make sure you can calculate slope for this lesson. Another important piece of this lesson is understanding the different types of ways of writing equations. So all of these you most likely discuss in Algebra 1. If not, that's okay. You can learn them now, or you can relearn them if that's the situation. So the slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b, where m is your slope and b is your y-intercept, where it's crossing the y-axis. Okay. And so that is a form that we write equations in, y equals mx plus b. Another form we write is point-slope form, y minus y sub 1 equals m times x minus x sub 1, where you have your slope m, and then x sub 1 and y sub 1 are a coordinate point that are on that line. And lastly is standard form, ax plus by equals c. We don't write that form as much, but sometimes we have to start in that form and move to a different form, where a, b, and c are just any values. The values for the equation, but they're any integers. Could go into a, b, and c. And so you'll need to know how to recognize or work with these forms, or at least understand the terms there. This is slope-intercept form, point-slope form, and standard form. These are in your notes. Hey, they are in your note page, the same with the slope formula. So if this is new to you, or if it is something you need to review, please make sure you're using your notes for that. And that might be a lot of you, like especially with the the pandemic locking down schools at the end of last year, and you were in Algebra 1, you may not have gotten to this with your teacher. And so you may have to kind of relearn this a little bit. So make sure to get help with that, but also be using your notes. So that stuff was more something that you would learn in Algebra 1 if you didn't. And so what we also want to discuss in this lesson is particularly about the slopes of parallel and perpendicular lines. So slope is the change from one point to another on a line, or sometimes we talk about it as the steepness of a line, or the flatness of a line, depending on it. And so in a coordinate plane, 2 distinct non-vertical lines are parallel if and only if they have the same slope. Okay, so two lines are parallel to each other if they have that same slope, the same rise over run, the same steepness. You can see here in this picture. And if you kind of think about it, if you had, if it's about its steepness, if you have one line that's going like this and one line that's going like that, those are different levels of steepness, and eventually they're going to cross each other, so those wouldn't be parallel. So in order for them to be parallel, they have to have that same rise over run, that same steepness. And so slopes of parallel lines have to be the same, okay? Or else they're not parallel. Okay? So to determine if two lines are going to be parallel, we can look at their slopes. For perpendicular lines, their slopes are a little different. In a coordinate plane, two non-vertical lines are perpendicular if and only if the product of their slopes is -1. So if I take the two slopes here of these two lines and multiply them together, and I get -1, that means those two lines are perpendicular to each other. Okay? And we can also say horizontal lines are perpendicular to vertical lines. And so these two lines are perpendicular to each other because when their slopes are multiplied together, they get -1. Another phrase that we use for that is called negative reciprocal. A negative reciprocal. And so that's like if I have 2 and -1/2. Those are, -1/2. Those are negative reciprocals of each other, and we'll look at those. But that's another way that we talk about perpendicular slopes is they're negative reciprocals of each other. So the thing that you really need to get from this and make sure you know from this lesson is that parallel lines have the same slope. Perpendicular lines have negative reciprocal slopes. Okay? Have negative reciprocal slopes, and we'll look at what those are if you haven't seen those. Do look at your note page. I talk more, or we look at more of that in your notes for negative reciprocal slopes. All right, so let's look at this example here where we're determining if lines are parallel or perpendicular or neither to each other. What's their relationship? Are they parallel and perpendicular or something else, which is just neither? And so we have 4 lines in this image, line A, B, C, and D. And we can see that we have 2 points on each of the line that help us find the slope. You just need to find 2 points on the line to find what your slope is. So to determine if 2 lines are parallel to each other or if they're perpendicular to each other, you need to find the slope between those lines and then compare them. So line A, using a slope formula, we find the slope to be 1/3, B has a slope of 1/2, C has a slope of 1/2, and D has a slope of -2. Okay? And so then start comparing them. So if I look at line A and line B, line A has a slope of 1/3, line B has a slope of 1/2. Are those the same slope? No. Are they negative reciprocals of each other? No. So those lines are not parallel or perpendicular. They're just 2 lines. There's no special relationship between them. Okay, what about line A and line C? Line A is 1/3, line C is 1/2. No, same thing. Line A and line D? No, same thing. There's no relationship. They're not parallel or perpendicular. Okay, and so line A doesn't have any relation to the others. Line B has a slope of 1/2. Line C has a slope of 1/2. Okay, so these two lines have a slope of 1/2. Are those the same slope? Yes. So that means they're parallel to each other. Okay? Line B and line C have the same slope, so they're parallel to each other. What about line B and line D? Line B is 1/2, line D is -2. Those are negative reciprocals of each other. They're the opposite sign, one positive 1/2, -2. And sometimes people talk about like you flip it, like a fraction, it's 1/2, and then you flip it, it's 2/1, which is just 2. Or if you multiply them together, that would be -1. 1/2 times -2 is -1. And so those are negative reciprocals of each other, which means they're perpendicular. So B and C are parallel to each other, and B and D are perpendicular to each other. And since C is also 1/2, has a slope of 1/2, it'd be the same thing. It's parallel to B, and it's perpendicular to D. Okay? And so you can see here the final answers down here. Which lines are parallel? So if they have the same slope, they're parallel. Negative reciprocal slopes, they are perpendicular. And again, with those negative reciprocal slopes, it has to be, what we call sometimes the flip of it or the reciprocal of it, okay? And the opposite sign. So one has to be positive, one has to be negative. And if it's 2, then it's 1/2. If it was 3, it's 1/3. If it was 9/5, The other one has to be 5 over 9, and again they have to be opposite signs. Okay? And so that's the negative reciprocal.